All right, folks, we got Jack Childs here from Veteran Service Brands. It's gonna be a very exciting episode as we hear his background. He's the first one he's been he is a franchisor. We're not gonna be talking about a specific franchise. He's been, a business owner. He's been in the military. This is a kind of a unique episode here, and I think we'll learn a lot. So, Jack, thanks for being here.
Thank you. This will be very, very exciting.
Cool. Yeah, so I just wanted to start with I know you sounded like you were excited. I just wanted to start with your background. Like you have a cool background, I think, of how you got to where you are today, and kind of just run us through it.
Okay. I'm a dumb white Irish kid from the south side of Chicago. Joined the Army. Best decision I ever made because I was not going in the right direction back then. Um, After the Army, went to college on the GI Bill, got an ROTC slot and a pilot slot through ROTC at Embry-Riddle. Joined the Air Force, flew 141s after pilot training for 6 years. As an instructor pilot, taught the instructor pilot course, mostly specialized also in aerial refueling. Stepped out of one cockpit into the next at Delta Airlines, flew with them for 32 years. Started as a flight engineer on the Boeing 727, finished as a captain on the Airbus 350. But during that time, as a pilot, post 9/11, company went bankrupt, lost my pension. I was grounded for a while on a medical. I started looking for plan B, and I started a driveway sealing business up here in the Northeast. It's kind of big business, applying the black stuff on your driveway. I franchised that way too early. I followed a franchise advisor's advice. Wasn't the best advice. Oh, you should franchise. Well, I was not prepared to franchise. However, we did a lot of things right, and we grew. We grew our local market pretty quickly. Had a 10 or 12 or 13 locations. And then I branched off into another brand that was related, and that was in the parking lot striping space. And I was the first franchisor to identify that market as a potential for franchising. And that was just starting to take off. We might have had 10 or 12 locations there. Had a partner problem. He pretty much imploded and took a lot of us down with him. Wound up having to sell that business. That was in 2012, and didn't think I'd ever go back in the striping or asphalt businesses. I had a no compete, but I was looking at there's an entrepreneurial itch, and I was like, well, my no compete's coming up, and what am I going to do? And I started looking at being a franchisee. Explored a number of franchises. Couldn't quite find one that I liked, and but I had felt strongly that the parking lot scraping concept really needed to be expanded on a national level. There at the time there was no national brand, and you've got big box stores that are. It's a very complicated and confusing, chaotic system of getting people to stripe parking lots across the country with no national brand at the time. So I decided to franchise that concept. I knew the striping business, and I knew it was very franchisable. And a couple lessons I learned from my first experience was veterans were the easiest to work with. And I also learned that, sometimes when things go wrong for a franchisee, they're very quickly to point the finger at the franchisor. Didn't really get that from the veteran folks. They owned it. They were some of our best franchisees, and when and all businesses struggle one time or another. When they were struggling, they reach out and we come up with a solution, and they come up with a plan and execute the plan and get the business back on track. I also, I was kind of post Vietnam, pre the global war on terrorism, and I thought the post 9/11 folks had a lot harder than I ever did. And so I had a soft spot for them. Um, we'd actually given away a free franchise with my old brand to a Purple Heart recipient. Um, so I really wanted to kind of target post 9/11 vets in particular. But we created a brand that's exclusive to veterans. We were the first to do it. And so we launched GeForce back in 2017, sold our first franchise in 2018, and we just signed, I think, our 50th location is signing today or tomorrow. Since then, since 2017, several competitors have popped up, and suddenly parking lot striping is the new, you know, uh, uh, what's the word I want?
It's the
It's the
hot thing.
new hot item for some
Yeah.
of the franchise brokers, and some of my competitors have far surpassed me in number of locations because two reasons. One, they have a broader audience they can sell to. We have, you know, 7% of the population are veterans, so we're excluding 93% of the population right off the top. Second reason, and it's primarily we give uh, award really large territories where our competitors will award territories as small as like 1/10 our territory size. So they can put several more franchisees in the same geographic area where we'll put one. Well, for example, like Atlanta, we'll have one for all of Atlanta Metro, and
Oh
my
wow.
competitors are in a position to put two, three, or more in there, so they can have more franchise locations. But we want to make sure our folks have really big territories to grow into. Anyway, so then GeForce was taking off, and we were starting to get calls from folks who wanted a GeForce franchise, but it was sold out. And some of our franchisees were looking to get into the epoxy floor business. So we launched the brand Mach 1 epoxy floors a couple of years after we launched GeForce. About that same time, the brother-in-law of our very first franchisee was in the painting business, and he wanted a franchise. So we helped him franchise his business. He rebranded to Paint Corps, like Marine Corps. And we also have kind of a sister company called Field Ops, and uh, that franchise is kind of a more lower cost, kind of a side hustle that you can develop into something bigger, and that focuses on sport court markings like soccer fields, football fields, tennis court repairs, and resurfacing. So all in all, we're just shy of 100 locations, I think, across all the brands, and that's kind of where we sit. And I'm using the company shirt, Veteran Service Brand is the umbrella company for all those locations.
Very cool. So you went from, Army enlisted all the way through pilot, and I think you did a couple combat missions. Am I right?
Uh, yeah, combat light, I'll call it.
Yeah.
Based on what's happened post 9/11. Many of your audience may not even know about Grenada as a little island uh, north of South America. Um, During Ronald Reagan's days, it was actually my very first mission as a co-pilot. We were diverted to Pope Air Force Base, and there's a lot of activity going on. And we said, "What's happening?" And they said, "You'll find out in the morning. Better get some rest." So then they said, "Okay, we're invading Grenada." And we're like, "Great, where's that?" So uh, I was in some of the first C-140 that first day down there. I joked that I was flying with a crusty old lieutenant colonel who, looking back, he was probably 45. So crusty old has a relative meaning now. Um, and so it was pretty interesting. Your very first mission in the Air Force, and they're briefing you on surface to air missiles. Small world story. I was a military police investigator. I went through school, military police investigative school, with the Air Force for their SPI folks, and there was a guy named Dave Fox in my class. And so it's one of those training events you go to for a couple months, and you never see people again. I walk into the briefing room to be briefed as the co-pilot for this mission, and here's Dave Fox, who I hadn't seen since my Army days, is
Oh
briefing
wow.
me on the threat in Grenada, and he had advanced in the security police. I forget what division that was in now, but kind of like the Army's CID division. But anyway, that was a really neat small world story.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's cool. That's
Picked
cool.
up an air
So,
medal on that mission. Another fun story. Coming from military police background, used to carrying a 38 snub nose, they handed out 38 snub noses to our loadmasters, and we had a female loadmaster on our flight. And I said, "So what? You know, like, what are you going to do with that thing? If something happens, we get hijacked." She says, "Well, I'm going to shoot you." I said, "What?"
what?
She goes, "Yeah, because we can't let the aircraft be hijacked. I'm going to shoot you and the aircraft commander." I said, "Well, wait a minute here. That's really, you should shoot the bad guy. Maybe consider that."
You got to keep them guessing. They'll never see it coming.
Right. So it's like, oh, great. I've got the Cubans are going to be shooting at me. And now my loadmasters, no, everybody's after Lieutenant Jack. So
That's so funny. Yeah, I don't
that's
know.
my
You must have
little
said
war
something
story.
to make her upset that day or something. Uh,
Yeah.
well, cool. So, kind of looking back, right, those early days, what do you think, if anything, right, contributed that you picked up from the military that contributed to your success as a business owner, and then, and I think as a franchisor, those are like two different things, right? So, like, how would you look at that?
Yeah. So I, I initially, I kind of thought the Air Force really just taught me to fly. Right. And the Army taught me how to be a police investigator or whatever. But, look, benefit of hindsight, you start realizing there's a lot more to that. Um, I think for me as a franchisor, I'm essentially teaching others how to run a business, and uh, it's not an easy task to do. Um, Teaching someone to fly an airplane is not an easy task. So really, I was my instructor pilot experience, I think, really translates pretty well to that of franchisor. You need to be able to understand kind of the laws of learning, if you will, and also being able to remember what it's like when you first started your own business, all the millions of questions, and you come at it from a position of trying to put yourself in their shoes and help them through those steep learning curves and plateaus, and get them to that point where they can run their flight or run their business successfully.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense because really, it's almost exactly like being an instructor pilot, right? Like you were a pilot and you learned to fly. Like you were a business owner, you learned to run a business. Now you're teaching people how to do it. Um, and it's probably just as scary as flying a plane, and just as complex
Scarier.
sometimes.
I can assure
Yeah,
you.
yeah, very interesting. Okay, so let's look at kind of like the cumulative of military days, Delta, franchisor days, right? If you could basically give one lesson to yourself 30 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever, right? What would that like one lesson be? What's the most important takeaway for going to go build big business?
So I tried a number of businesses and frankly failed at them. You know, um, I wish I had found a really good franchise brand years ago, because there's so much to learn as a new business owner. You don't realize how much is involved in building a really solid business. And I had some good ideas, but there were a lot of weak spots. More resources were needed than I had, and a, a really solid franchise will take a lot of that off of your plate and let you focus on the systems and following the system. And if I had done that, you know, uh, back in '05 when I launched my first brand and tried to be a franchisor, and just been a really good franchisee at a good brand, I'd be in a completely different space. I think by now I'd have multiple locations, maybe multiple brands, you know, a much longer, history, maybe been able to sold and exited on a few. I really wish I had done I will say, in my defense, I kind of thought franchises were rich folks back then. You know,
Mhm.
I've
Yeah.
since learned that's not the case.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's just as an example, right? Just to hit on that topic real quick, like, what's the all-in someone needs to bring to the table and, like, get it and then get funding for to start the 4 different brands within the veteran service brands?
So, you know, um, the SBA is probably your friend here. You might be able to come to the table with as little as $15,000, right? They want to see some buy-in, uh, and some of the rules are changing right now, so that put an asterisk on there. But maybe 10% of the buy-in, if the franchise fee and the equipment and trailer, whatever you're buying, is comes in at 150 grand, you should have 15 or 20 grand. They're going to want to see that down. You're definitely going to need more than that, and maybe that's part of the what you're borrowing, some operating capital, but you don't need a lot of money to do it, because of the SBA. It's really it's a wonderful program. Most of our folks go through the SBA.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's also unique to mobile businesses, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you need a 2,000 square foot place that requires extensive upgrades to the space, plus you need a bunch of equipment to put into it, right? Well, then you are hitting that 500,000 to $1 million
Mm-hmm.
range, and then the SBA wants to see more closer to 20% plus
Right.
substantial amount of post closing liquidity, right? So, um, I think that's what people don't realize is there's home based or office based or flex based where you're paying $1,000 in rent or something.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm a big fan of home based. I
yeah,
just think it, it's safer bet. You don't have as many other obligations. That overhead's lower. Uh, there are some home based businesses that can have better margins and better numbers than some of these brick and mortar operations. And a lot of times you'll find, you know, and I only tangentially have, insight into some of the food space things, but you need several of those to make a good living. There's, yes, you're buying an X sort of sandwich shop. You're typically not going to be able to just buy that one sandwich shop for a fairly substantial amount of money and then make that living that you want off that. They really want you to have two, three, four, five or more, and you can make a very good living at that. But now you're also leveraged, you know, quite a bit out there. You've got a lot on the line. Some home-based businesses can run some very, very, very good numbers, and maybe you don't buy more of those, but you buy a different home-based business that complements that. As your other way to grow too.
yeah, yeah. And then sometimes too, it's not about hitting the home run off the bat, right? Like our franchise, it's home based, very low to get into, very easy to run. We'll grow it to be, I think, what most people would think to be a pretty big business, but we'll sell it and get one of these that I think have the economies of scale that I think this one just doesn't have. So I think there's also like starter franchises out there, right? That
Mhm.
people just to get in the game, and there's no way we'd be able to build that amount of wealth by doing anything else. If we took that same amount of money and bought real estate, take us 10 times the amount of time it would take to just build this business up. I think that's something else people don't really realize.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so let's say you're talking to someone, they're not a veteran, right? So you can't, right? This isn't just telling them that they should go look at veteran service brands. They're not a
Mhm.
veteran. Um, they want to get into franchising. How would you describe to them the right way to think about franchising and the right way to know if the franchise is right for them?
I think if I were completely cold and didn't know where to begin, I'd find a good broker that I could work with. But I'd be very upfront with them. I'd want them to tell me that I expect to know what your commission is. If they don't want to share that, then you move on, go to the next commit. If they're presenting 5 brands, I want to know what their commission is on those brands. Some brands will, let's say it's a $50,000 franchise fee. They might be running sort of a special with the broker network. Say, well, we'll give you 75, 80%. And so that brand is going to put $40,000 in the broker's pocket, whereas another brand that might be at 65,000, it's more out of the franchisee's pocket. It might be a better value franchise for the franchisee themselves, but the commission might be smaller and it might take a back seat to the higher commission. And this is, this will probably ruffle some feathers in the broker network, but they all know that this goes on. Just make sure that they're putting your interests first and not theirs. And lots of great brokers are going to do that. There are some who won't, right? They're going to focus on the higher commission for
Yeah.
you.
I would switch that around. I would say some will do the right thing and most will look after
Well, I'm
the
trying to be frank. Since
Anyway,
I think you're a broker or were,
I
I'm
am
not
a
sure.
broker, and I'm
Okay.
gonna talk about why what I've done to erase that bias and some others, but
Right.
please keep going.
No, so I think that's, and also, um, you can even ask the brokers, if they might be willing to work with you on that commission, and maybe they'll pay for the wrap on your vehicle or something too. There's nothing cast in stone that says the broker's commission is this, and I can't do anything about it. So everything can be negotiable, I think. And then as far as vetting I would ask. In fact, I'll put in a little pitch from my book that's coming out. Veterans in Franchising. It's a field manual for veterans thinking about getting into franchising. I have a list of questions to ask a franchise broker as one of my appendices in the back. I have a list of questions to ask the franchisor. I have a list of questions to ask the other franchisees. And so let's talk about vetting a franchisor for a moment. The very best thing you can do, let's say the broker presents several interesting brands. First of all, let me back up. Don't I would try to keep an open mind about what you might consider doing. Not one of our franchisees who's out there running a parking lot striping business ever thought that this is what they wanted to do in life. Um, but once we told them, about the business model itself, that it was for veterans only, we got their interest. Then we talked about, the uniqueness of our industry. It's kind of under the radar. There's plenty of competition, but a lot less than other things like landscaping and that sort of thing, and pressure washing. So uh, keep an open mind. And I'd also warn or caution folks. Um, let's say you really like wine and you like drawing. There are franchises that combine, art and wine, and that would be great if it lines up with actually what the business can do for you, as opposed to just satisfying your need to drink and draw. Is it also giving you that lifestyle that you might want and the income from that? So um, some people say do what you love. Others say, really you're making a mistake if you're trying to do what you love, because quite often what you love isn't going to put money in your pocket. I love to fish, but I don't know how to turn that into, a career, if you will. Uh, and then once they present those brands to you, you know, uh, there's a whole list of things to go over in that franchise disclosure document. But the most important thing you can do is to call franchisees who are living it or who have lived it. And that's in item 20 of the franchise disclosure document. They're listing all the franchisees who are with them and those who've left, whether they sold, transferred, or were terminated. I'd focus on, frankly, those who were terminated, find out what's the story behind those. If you get a franchisor or a broker says, well, call these 5 franchisees, that's a big red flag. They want you to call the 5 happy guys out of, the fifth out of the 55. The other 50 might be miserable, and they only want you to talk to these 5. Um, so I would call, if there were 50 in a brand, I'd be calling at least 20, 25 of them to really, and from around different parts of the country, and try and find one that sort of matched my demographics, if you will. And when you do call them, you need to use some etiquette and build some rapport. You don't want to say, "Hey, I'm so and so. I'm thinking of buying your franchise. How much money are you making?" Right? That's not a conversation that's going to go very far. You just tell them, "Hey, I'm thinking of joining you and being with you at the conventions. If you had to do it all over again, would you do it? What do you like? What don't you like?" There's no perfect system out there. That I don't know of any perfect franchise. But calling franchisees is probably the most important thing you could do.
Very cool. Yeah, and I totally um agree with that, right? And I've got a lot of there's a web app, it's free, you don't have to talk to me to use it, app.tracerfranchising.com, and it has I've got it outlined in 18 steps. I've got the FTD review in 4 different steps because there's 23 items to it. The validation, speaking to franchisees, there's a ton of questions in there, including ones to build rapport before you get into the money questions, which you should ask, right? You just shouldn't lead with them. So yeah, good advice there. A lot of research. And I think one thing that you hit on, about almost tangentially, right, about how all because you like drinking and painting doesn't mean you should buy one of those, painting with a twist or whatever. And I think a lot of that's because you're not going to be the teacher, and if you are, your business is never going to grow to be very big, right? Where I would rather have a business that you can't hate it. It's you got to be willing to
Right.
talk about it because it's gonna be your life. Um, but one that affords me to go on trips to Paris and, get real wine and, paint
Right.
with whatever
Right.
premium paint there is or whatever, right?
Right.
Um, so you gotta figure out what your goals are. And then I always tell people like that should be your checklist because at the end, people like fall in love with these franchises and they buy them. And then 6 months later, they're like, oh my God, like I just really like that sales guy, right? I don't actually, this doesn't, is going to help me hit any of my goals.
Right.
Um, and so it's like, go back to what you wrote down at the beginning and said what you were trying to accomplish. And then it's like, has a bunch of franchisees accomplished what you want to accomplish? Right.
Hmm.
And if they haven't, then don't do it. It's that
Right.
simple.
Yeah.
Um, cool. You mentioned when you started seal coating, were you still at Delta when you were doing that?
Hmm.
So do you think, like, how do you think now about people leaving their jobs to start a business versus having a job where you're working a couple days a week and running the business?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I hate to answer with it all depends, right?
Yeah.
It kind of, there are some jobs that can be done, and you might be available 4 or 5 days a week to run the business. I really, it's tricky. And I will say, um, you know, looking back, I, I was flying and I was the franchise and I was everything in the franchise. I was our entire staff early on at GeForce, and I'm flying to Asia. That's most people say don't do that. And I don't recommend it. um, but I was able to, fly on weekends. Right. And so I was around and I was basically around 4.5 days a week anyway. And I would alert my guys, hey, I'm going to be out of town. I'll be out of contact. I had, internet on the airplane on my crew rest. I could respond to questions, and I'm flying over, essentially the North Pole and answering questions or whatever. I don't recommend it, and uh, uh, probably steer away from guys like me, right? Because it probably won't work. But I made it work, and uh, I'm my ears are feeling red. I'm a little embarrassed to look back and say, "Gosh, I did probably some things that are kind of stupid that you really wouldn't." If you were designing a franchise system, you would not say, "Okay, you should go be an airline pilot on the weekends and then do this during the weekend. And it's going to work out." Right? It's the odds were stacked against me, but I tend to swim upstream anyway. So,
Yeah. I think that's really should be an exception, right? I think a lot of franchises say that they're semi passive and you can keep your job and all this stuff. And I don't think that's
oh,
true, right? I try
right.
to tell
Okay.
people,
I thought yeah. So the whole semi-passive discussion is another lengthy one. So be very careful about this whole semi-passive stuff. It's kind of it's a descriptor that's overused and oversimplified. And if you're going to go into business, you need to be committed to doing it. And um, I was fully committed to the franchise. I knew I was retiring in a couple of years, and we only had a few locations early on, and I had a way to manage that on a full time basis. But that's certainly the exception. If you're working 9 to 5, for somebody else, and you're buying one of these passive income franchises, as they say, make sure it truly is able to fill that, and you don't have to commit that much time because or you budgeted enough to find a really good rock star manager for you, but that comes at a cost, right? So um I hear lots of horror stories from folks who thought they were buying a passive income franchise. It's not just an investment. It's a business, and businesses are like babies. They need everything, from the moment they're launched. They're completely dependent upon you until they can stand up and start at least crawling on their own and eventually walking on their own.
Yeah. Yep. And so I think kind of the takeaways is with G-Force, that wasn't your first business, right? You've been through that whole song and dance several times. You're working 2 days a week on the weekends, which I think almost no one else that I talk to is doing that. And you kind of knew what you were doing, right? So I think that is, like you said, it is the exception. I can think of, I literally went through over 100 franchises that claim they were semi-passive, and I think I found six that I think I would personally say, like, yeah, I could see that potentially doing
Mm-hmm.
it. Um, so yeah, that was just one thing I wanted to kind of throw out there. And then let's say the other thing is you have gone through the emerging franchisor phase, right? And this is one thing that I still haven't been able to figure out, right? And I tell people if they haven't been around for 5 years, they don't have at least 100 franchise locations open, or maybe if it's like the fifth brand in a platform, and we know that platform has all other solid brands, right? Like I just say it's not worth the risk because I just can't figure out how do I tell if you should be number 10 or not, right? So like what do you tell people who are thinking about emerging brands?
Well, we're essentially all emerging brands, right? So all brands have to emerge from somewhere. Some folks like to be in on the early stage. They can have a greater impact. I mean, my first franchisees, my first 10, 15, 20, we have a really unique bond and really close fellowship there. Um, I'd like to see that with all of our folks, but it truly is those early folks who believed in you. You create, and they've been around longer, of course. You have a really unique bond. They are taking more risk, and some people aren't. If you're not comfortable with risk, don't go into business. And then there's a matter of degrees after that. Um, do you want to be number unit 352, or would you like being unit number 25 out of a brand that might only get to 50 or 100? I think there's that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So it's just kind of personal factor. Yeah, it's
Well,
just a tough
you think
thing.
about my first franchisee, right? I ran a Facebook ad for $20, and I get this my first ad, and I get this inquiry, and I get him on the phone, and we're talking, and he's going, "Yeah, I really like it. Let's do it." This is going to be easy, right? Because now this is my first, you know, uh, attempt to recruit only veterans, right? And so he found out. We talked about a military background. He had been to 2 tours, and he did not like where he was at. He was working for the man, as he says, and he just was looking for something. And I happened to be at the right place at the right time, at least for him, thinking I want to try something. And he took that risk, right? That was a giant risk, and I also took a big risk on him because if your first few franchises are duds, then the brand can die very quickly and never recover. Uh, I consider myself one of the luckiest guys in the franchise world. He's been an incredible franchisee. No one could come up with a better first franchisee, I don't think. Um, I kind of consider him like my adopted son. Um, he's got his 20th anniversary in Germany. I'm going to fly over for to help him celebrate that. So uh, he would tell you it's the best thing he's ever done. But that he rolled some big dice.
Yeah.
And the good news is, at the time, our franchise fee is really low, and the equipment is always resellable. So it's not like you're going to lose hundreds of thousands of dollars. If it all crashed and burned, he might have lost 40 grand. If
Yeah.
if it completely crashed and burned, and that's nothing compared to some of the horror stories I hear, from other much more expensive brands that aren't working out there.
Yeah. And that's yeah, I think there are a couple differences there, right? And like the biggest one that you, especially the emerging brands, when I talk to people that they're finding are ones that sold, 150 in the last 12 months. And
Mhm.
I think that's much different than someone who's coming in who's growing at a slower pace, who cares more about the franchisees, it feels like, than just selling territories.
Mhm.
And who have, when I have to buy 5 territories to create a decent sized business, right? Like that alone kind of tells me what I need to know about the franchisor. Um, which is I
So
see
I
a lot. So
so you touched on a couple things there. Um, I will certain I'll never have that problem of having 100 in a year to manage, right? We're kind of slow and steady here. We're the tortoise and the hare. Um, we might add 20 across all brands in the year. It's 25 maybe. We're not we don't end well, I mean, my team could flex up. We would have to add more folks, and but we just don't have that much of a demand for what we're doing. We don't have the broker network, or we don't have a giant budget. We have a limited audience, so all sorts of factors come into the fact that we have a pretty slow and steady recruitment, and we don't have a lot of stores signed and not opened, right? And so when you talk about those emerging brands that have a lot on the in the pipeline, I that would be something I'd want to make sure I knew what I was getting into, because the sales machine is way ahead of the operational support, and it should be the other way around. And
yeah,
then we can talk about the territory game for a moment, if you like, and I call it that in my book. Um, when we sell a franchise, we call them zones, and we basically, if you come to us from somewhere like, let's say, Columbus, Ohio, for GeForce, um, we will take all of Columbus Metro rather than cutting in half or thirds. We basically say, okay, how many people are in Columbus Metro? Let's say it comes in at 3.5 million. That's kind of our we call it like regular territory plus 3 zones, I think, is how it comes out. Um, but we don't want to sell only part of Columbus and then sell the other part to someone else, where a lot of franchises will want to put 2 in there, because the franchise system, the franchisor, will make more money if they have 2 people operating in Columbus over what we can make with only 1 operating. But our 1 can do a lot more than just one of the others. Do you know what I'm getting at?
yeah.
So
So
our
kind of what
one
just
person, but he can't do as much as 2, but he can do more than the 1. And so we'll collect fewer in royalties, but we'll have a happier franchisee, I think, at the end of the day. And so when we sell a franchise, we say we sold a franchise in Columbus, whereas our competitors will say we sold 3 territories in Columbus, right? Because they've got these little tiny territories, and one of them is not enough to survive on. It is not enough for you to build a business on. And I think any franchise system, I'll ruffle some more feathers here gladly. Any franchise system that's selling you a single territory that you can't make a good living at is doing a disservice to everybody, and eventually themselves, because it's not going to work for them. So, and also the way to increase their income on the front end is to have more territories. To say, oh, you buy 1, but we'll give you the second territory at a 80% discount, and then the third territory. So now you're spending a lot of money to get to what should be just a workable territory that, and I'm talking about home services primarily here, because that's a territories don't count for, brick and mortar and, food places like that. The location counts and, how close they place them. But I'm talking about service businesses where you need a servicing area, and to just have these little tiny territories. So you have to buy 2, 3, 4, or 5 to make an actual territory work. I don't, I just don't, I don't agree with that. I wish that practice was prohibited.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the other thing in territories I'm gonna throw in here too, and it matters less, you guys, if you have 1,000,000 people, right, like, you're gonna hit whatever demographics that you're looking for. But a lot of these franchises, they say, "Hey, our territory is 200,000 people." And it's like, "But you service businesses." Like, how what is the or you service homeowners, or you service like us, we service children, right, the franchise I own. And it's like, what is 200,000 people, what does that tell you about the TAM, right? The total addressable market within that territory? It doesn't tell you anything.
Right.
And I think that's something else that I hate to see is when it's just a population. It feels lazy, right? Instead of being like, this is who my target customer is, and you get, you know, there's some math you can do behind it. It's not terribly sophisticated. It's not, it's not obvious, but
Right.
where you can figure out what a size of territory really should be. Um,
So, we're guilty of that. We use population. However, um, we've not been able to find any software that can tell me how many parking stalls there are. We also, with my own travels, and I know that, Phoenix is going to have a lot of parking lots, right? So we're picking large metropolitan, and then those sort of secondary areas like, the Greenvilles, um, like Dayton, or, Cleveland or Toledo. These are areas that we know are have typically like a downtown, and then a surrounding suburban area. And the suburban area is where you find most of your work, right? It's the strip malls and that sort of thing. New York has great population, but New York City would be really kind of a less than ideal franchise for us, because there's very little parking, and it's inside garages that are never emptied. It's New York City is not great, but Long Island, great market, right? You've got all those strip malls and office buildings, that support the folks who are commuting into New York, and so on and so forth. So we do, I guess, using your word, we kind of take the lazy way out, but our territories are so large that we're really trying to find folks, a population of 3 million people in an
Yeah,
urban and
yeah, I mean, if you
suburban
give someone 3,000,000
environment.
people, then it doesn't matter.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I'm talking about
Yeah.
franchises that give 200,000, 300,000.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. If you have 3,000,000, like, that's
Right.
more like, what is your Denver person probably owns from Fort Collins down to, like, the Air Force Academy.
I don't think he goes all the way to the Air Force Academy, but he does. I think he services it. I don't think he owns it, but he's got all of Denver Metro.
Yeah, like, ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's literally 8 to
Yeah.
15,
And at least 2 or 3 of our competitors. So I sleep well at night, right?
yeah.
Knowing they've got plenty of territory to work with. If I was buying a 200,000 population, and I'd want to know for yours, like, how many kids might there be in this age group, or, how many homes of a certain value in, or what's the median income. Those are factors that matter for other service businesses with much smaller territories, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and, we had some insight into the number of schools. I don't think it was super accurate, but then we found out that beyond that, also need to know the number of children, because, like, the population is decreasing in one of like, the child population, but the adult population is increasing. So it, like, has these weird factors in it.
Mm.
Um, anyway, it's just tough to think about as you go through.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about questions to ask, territories. What are things that, like, that are big red flags? You're like, hey, if I see this, I'm out.
Mm. So, item 20, lots of terminations. I, you know, I, I follow this one brand, lots of terminations. And then on LinkedIn, they're announcing someone just finished graduating school. It's like, did you not read the FDD? And the FDD gives this air of authority, and even though the chart is telling you really ugly numbers, it looks very official, and it almost looks like it's sanctioned, by the Federal Trade Commission, the way it's presented. And again, and in some ways it sanitizes really bad information. It should be in red as the color of blood for some of these things where, if you're seeing lots of terminations, um, and what's lots of, I think the SBA might go as far as 40% turnover rate. That seems really high to me. Now, if you have a small brand, you can get to 40% in a hurry. If you've got a large brand with, even 100, a 40% turnover rate, that means like 40% of your folks have either failed or they're selling it. And probably with that kind of number, it's not selling it at a profit. It's probably just maybe selling it at a loss to get out of it. So item 20, folks really need to understand what those numbers mean for sure.
Yep.
And those numbers are only good to the day that they're published. So we all franchise and, launch our new FDDs in, March or April. If you're talking with a franchise in November, December, you might ask them what's happened since this FDD. They don't have to disclose it on paper, but they do have to answer you, at least ethically, in person if you ask them what's happened since the last FDD was issued.
Yep. And part of
Little
the
little
research
things most
process
folks
and,
would
and the
not think
tools.
to ask. I'm sorry.
Yeah, part of the research process that I have in the tools that I have is a link to the SBA default list, right? And so you
Mm,
can go in there, and those are updated monthly, right? So um you can see the exactly how many people have defaulted on the SBA loans. Now it doesn't tell you if somebody paid for cash, right, and then lost the business, right? Like that's not
uh-huh.
in there. But you
Right.
can get a good idea from there as well.
I'd love
Um,
that link. If I haven't, I'm not familiar with it one. I would probably include that in my book. So
yeah, for sure. I'll send that to you.
by the way,
And then
I'll plug Josh here. He has this really neat thing where he called the franchisor the bridge, where you're standing when you're launching your business and where you want to be, and you have to cross this canyon, and you want the bridge to be built as wide as possible to get you to the other side. And so he was kind enough to let me use that image in my book, and it's really good representation. And at a recent IFA seminar, it was the most photographed slide of my presentation. So thanks.
well, I appreciate that. Okay. What was the next thing? Oh, okay. What outside services would you recommend potential franchisees paying for, right? Like CPAs, lawyers, feasibility studies. Like, what are things that you think are worth spending the money on?
I would hire a franchise attorney, not just any attorney, but one who specializes in franchise law, because uh, there's we can any franchise can hand you the franchise disclosure document, and there's no law that says you have to have it looked at by an attorney. You don't even have to read it, and you can sign receipt for it, and 2 weeks later you could be a franchisee over there and discover later what what the words in it say. But hire a franchise attorney, not just a contract attorney, because there are definitely some nuances and some real certain language is used in franchising that's not used in standard contract law. Um, and the more expensive the investment, the more money I'd spend on a franchise attorney, frankly, to make sure I understand all the ins and outs. Let's say it involves, a restaurant needs a liquor license. Make sure you've got someone, locally that can walk you through that licensing process, or a franchise attorney who's dealt with that sort of business. But find a franchise attorney for sure, and they should. I think you should find one who specializes in that, and that's what they do almost 100% of the time. There are lots of attorneys out there with list franchise law, but also contract law and real estate permitting. And I'd really focus on a franchise attorney for sure. Some of the what was the third thing you said? Something about a study,
A feasibility study.
feasibility study. Again, I think it depends. Some things are just pretty obvious, you know. lawn mowing. You know, there's lots of homes. There's plenty of competition, but there's always a way to compete. But if you get into some things that are more nuanced, is there really that much demand for what they're offering? Um, so that might be a consideration. Again, I think it sort of parallels the investment.
Okay. And then the last thing we'll talk about before we get into the veteran service brands is um before people start their franchising journey. I get this question all the time. I'd love to hear your thought on it. Right? Like should they get an MBA? Should they take business classes? Should they take accounting classes? Like what do people need to know or do before they start a franchise?
Uh, you got to know whether you have the fire more than the knowledge. You really, you have to really want it. And you just kind of, and you can't just dip your toes in and pretend. And I'll give you an example. If I see a contractor with a magnet on his car, I'm not, a magnet with his name and or their business name, but he's not real. He's not in it, you know. Um, you have to be ready to go all in. As far as I mean, it never hurts to take accounting classes. I don't know how much good they'll do you. I took accounting classes. I don't touch that stuff. I would find good support teams who maybe, can do it at less than the going rate. Someone working from home that's a qualified QuickBooks bookkeeper, but it's a mom of 3 kids and she can do your books, at her convenience, and that's fine for most businesses, certainly in the early stages. Um, I I would probably visit with the folks at Score that's at the sponsored by the SBA, but again, it kind of depends on who you're teamed up with and whether they're going to actually offer you real solid advice or some of the stuff that you can pick up in any book giving advice on how to start a business, um, if it's really, really granular and meant for you, or if it's just kind of the pablum that, most people kind of spout. So, um, I don't know. I'm certainly not an MBA. I'm not sure, uh, you know, I wouldn't take, I wouldn't go that route to then go open a business per se. Obviously if you have an MBA, you'll be armed with some skills that others don't have, but I'm not sure you need to go through that process first. In fact, I think for a lot of kids these days, they'd be better off spending whatever their parents were going to spend on college and investing in a small, lower cost business. And they can probably do better than, you know, a lot of folks coming out of college can do. That's a
Yeah.
different discussion as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that really kind of hit it, right? Is like you have to want it because it's not easy. Like maybe it's easier than like a tech startup, right? But it's not. You're going to be working just as hard. You just won't be working on AI and bioscience. Um,
Right.
but like you're still going to be working really hard. And if you don't want it, then you're going to give up at some point.
Oh yeah. And it's easy to fail. It's the easiest thing you can do.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Um, you have to, you have to be able to work through those days where you're ready to give up. And also, longer term, if you've given it your all and you're working at it and there is no light at the end of the tunnel, you need to also know when to throw in the towel too. But
yeah,
you know, that's part of the risk, right? You got to make those make those choices, those smart choices early on about who you're working with. Make sure you've got a support team. If you're doing the franchise route, if you're going it alone, and there's a lot of pluses to that. You don't have to answer to anybody else. You are literally your own boss. You make all the decisions. And some folks, they have to. Their personality doesn't allow others to be making sort of their decisions for them. But that's another hill to climb altogether. Where you don't realize how much work is involved. Our onboard checklist for, I think one of our brands has 89 steps, right? Most people don't think it takes that much to launch a business, but we've got like 89 defined steps that are in there to get your business off the ground. And that comes from a
Yeah.
lot of, experience and making mistakes and, figuring out what the steps are really needed to get that thing started.
Yeah. And I think like we experienced that. So my wife and I started a franchise. We bought into a franchise like about a year and a half ago, a little less than that. And it's a dance franchise, and neither of us know how to dance. In fact, we're laughed at weddings and other events when we try to dance together. Um, but that's what the franchise gives us, right? And we find girls who can dance, and they go teach kids how to
Mm-hmm.
do it. And the colors and the recital costumes and the choreography, it would be impossible. It would be impossible
Yeah,
for us to
I
do
know.
this by ourselves.
Right.
Um, and I've started businesses from scratch, and um, one of them I should have quit a long time before, and I lost a lot of money, even though I knew it was never going to work. I just didn't want to quit. So sometimes quitting is harder than not quitting in some
Mm,
certain instances.
yeah.
But
But I
yeah.
think
Anyway, cool.
more often than not, people quit early, right?
Yeah.
They, they don't give it a chance sometimes.
Yeah. 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 No, I agree with you there for sure. Okay. And then let's go back to veteran service brands. So, and this kind of applies broadly. Let's say someone comes to you and they say, "Hey, I like the support, I like the culture, I like service businesses. How do I know, should I be in Paint Corps? Should I be in G-Force? Should I be in
The
um the epoxy coating one? I always forget the name of that one. Like how would you
Mach 1.
direct them? Say it again, Mach 1,
Yeah.
that's right. How would you direct them to this is probably the best fit for you?
Right. Was sort of a disc profile, if you will. The the Mach 1, the Field Ops, and the G-Force are really kind of owner operator, and the, with obviously moving towards owner manager, whereas Paint Corps is definitely owner manager. It's a subcontractor model, so you're not the one with the paintbrush. We do have some locations that have some small teams, or they might tackle certain projects in house, but it's designed to be a subcontractor model. So you need to be able, you're more of a manager right off the bat. And you need to be willing to spend quite a bit more on marketing than is required with the other brands. And that makes some people very uncomfortable to be spending X amount per month. Seems like way too much. But it doesn't work without that spend. So we're looking for folks who are probably a little more um, is seasoned in terms of sales, and also probably a little more financially qualified to be over at the Paint Corps side. Um, the others are a little more hands-on, little less, a lot less cost for online ads, so to speak, to get the phone to ring initially, um, and also maybe where they're located. Um, you've got some markets that are growing fast, so there's lots of new construction, a lot of people moving in. Epoxy floors used to kind of be for the rich and just the car guys. Now, they're getting to be pretty common features in homes. So where you're seeing new construction, there's an opportunity, and actually older homes that are being renovated can still be a very good market for that, to refresh that sort of worn out concrete on the residential side. And we have definitely a commercial element to that as well. We do commercial epoxy floors, so we need to be able to kind of handle both residential and commercial. Frankly, all of them need some sales ability. Paint Corps probably more than the others. Mach 1 as well. It's probably right up there. Um, so some people who are introverted might not be a good fit for those brands.
Cool. So what we heard is we're looking for personality fits, and I think this applies broadly, right? You need to be a good personality fit. Um, financially, to be comfortable with whatever it requires on different businesses or different things. Whether it's managerial skills, operational skills, sales skills that needs to match. Um, and then as well thinking about your territory of like where you live, um, and like Florida. If I seal coating is really only for places that are extremely cold, right?
No, no. Seal coating's big business down south too.
Oh, okay. Well, that
Yeah. Crack sealing is bigger business up north because of the freeze thaw cycles. You're getting more cracking in the asphalt, but crack filling is important to pretty much wherever asphalt is. Um, in and there's also residential seal coating up here in the Northeast and in the Midwest. Most residences down south are using concrete driveways, so there's not really a residential market there. So you have to look, depending on what sort of brands you're looking at. Not talking about my own per se, but just because there's a high demand for X, in Buffalo, New York, doesn't necessarily mean Miami needs that same service at the same level. So if you're getting back to that early stage franchise, or make sure they understand the market where you live too. It might be working great in Buffalo, but it might not be as much, done in Miami.
yeah, yeah. Or like you said, you're great in uh 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 kind of the suburbs, but in New York City, it wouldn't be so great,
Right.
right? So like even understanding that difference. Okay. And then let's kind of wrap it up here. What's your long-term vision with veteran service brands?
Well, we'd like to see the portfolio grow by a couple of brands over the next few years. Nothing in the immediate future. We're still very early stage on three of the brands. Want to make sure those are really dialed in. Our franchisees are successful before we venture into other brands. But I see some opportunities there for we want to focus primarily on services that can be done B2B, business to business, and maybe some spillover into residential. But we're, with GeForce as kind of the anchor brand, we have a lot of contacts in the facility management space, and they have needs for other services that we're providing, like painting. So GeForce paints on the flat, and Paint Corp paints on the vertical, and Mach 1 is on the flat for um, flooring, floor coatings. Field ops doesn't fit in necessarily with the that side of things, but there are other services that we're eyeing that we think could tie in nicely. So we can, the customers can come to veteran service brands and get multiple support services through us without having to choose a number of different vendors, or even work with a number of our franchisees. We have project management capabilities at the VSB, Veteran Service Brands level, so they get that one-stop shop. So we want to be that one-stop shop for self-performing work for the big box stores, the chains, the facility management companies that manage multiple properties around the country. We're essentially becoming a facility management or a facility services business, is using the franchise model to fulfill those different services.
Yeah, that's smart,
We'd like
right?
to see 500 locations, in the next, 5 to 10 years across the brands. Yeah, I
Wow.
think that's easily done. We're already the largest veteran owned service network in the country.
Hmm.
There's not another one like it. We have lots of white space out there to make that bigger.
Awesome. Awesome. There you go. So there's lots of white space, folks. If you're listening, you're a veteran, and you think this sounds cool. Um, all right. So any asks from the audience before we say goodbye here?
Ask from the audience. Do your homework, right? Be prepared. I'd ask you to be respectful of the broker's time and the franchisor's time. We spend a lot of time getting, we'll have calls scheduled and no shows. If you're not interested, it's okay. Just tell us. We're big boys and girls. We can handle it. But do your homework. Call other franchisees. Buy my book. when it comes out, I think I think it'll be really good advice for you. It's not intended to sell any of our franchises. In fact, I think looking at my book objectively, half of it's written to talk you out of buying a franchise because I don't want to see veterans buying the wrong franchise. I'm all too familiar with some vets who've really lost a lot of money, and I'm confident if they had had my book that they would seen those red flags and known the questions to ask, and could have avoided that nightmare. I've written that book to prevent them from making the mistakes that others have. That said, our none of our brands is perfect either, and you'll never find a perfect franchise. So don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Find one that checks a lot of the boxes for you, and then once you're in, follow the system. You really should follow the system and attend all those, whether they're coaching sessions or town hall meetings or group chats. Make sure you're in on all of those. Typically, we see that locations that are struggling are the folks who don't show up to our weekly meetings, and that's really frustrating from a franchisor's perspective because we have a lot of time and effort invested in you, and then to see that location struggling when they're not there to accept the help is particularly frustrating. So be willing to learn and listen and be a sponge early on.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I appreciate it, Jack.
Thanks,
Definitely
Jeff.
look out for his book. I read it, gave him some feedback. I think it's the best book. I've probably read almost a dozen books on franchising right now. They're almost all written by brokers, and they're almost all saying things that I'm screaming like that's not the case. So definitely check his book out. And then something that's, if you need more of like a step by step, my free tools. You can never have to talk to me if you don't want to. But I have the tools out there because I think the franchising industry gets a bad rep, and if it keeps going the way it is, it's going to be regulated into nothing by the government, right? So I think the best way to do that is to offer these types of tools so people can ask good questions and avoid bad franchises. If you do want help and you want to know what brands I would recommend, I've whittled a list down from 700 to 70. Um, and we can find a franchise that's a good fit off that list, right? And I'll tell you what commissions I get. Doesn't matter, but that list was based off of a thesis that I created, and they either lived up to the thesis or they didn't, right? And that's how I got to those. So, love to talk to you, Josh at Tracer Franchising. Or you go to the website and tracerfranchising.com and book some time right off the website. So, thanks again, Jack. I really appreciate it,
Thank you, Jeff.
and I hope I know I learned some things. I hope the listeners did too.